And we're now going to turn to the man who has been out on the campaign trail, seeing all of this with his eyes, CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, I want to start with, we're going to get to some of those numbers Anthony talked about, but I want to start with this piece in The Atlantic by Jeffrey Goldberg, which recounts a number of instances in which the president had disparaging things to say about those who had fought in the military and died. There have been a lot of explosive things that have happened in this presidency. Do you think this matters at all in the campaign, or is it just another flashpoint?
It's certainly a flashpoint where I think the Biden campaign believes there could be potential political advantage for them is with rank and file members of the military, their families, and military veterans. And it's all part of the broader appeal to pick off disaffected Republicans or independents who might have voted for President Trump before, don't want to this year, but still need reason to vote for Joe Biden. And so I think what we saw when this was released, and again, you know, these are remarks that the president and his team strongly dispute, and we've seen more people on the president's side at least put their names to those disputes than, of course, people who confirmed it for Jeffrey Goldberg, is that this isn't now just about John McCain or about military leaders that the president would have met with to discuss military policy. It's about you, they're arguing. It's about you and your military family and the sacrifice that you or your brother or your husband made while serving in the military. Biden himself was quite struck by this, invoking the memory of his son, Beau, who served, saying, you know, how could you consider his service, or how could you consider him a sucker? How could you consider those that died in battle a loser, and that the president should apologize? So it's probably more in that regard, they believe, effective than to the general understanding that, yes, this is a president who has said things in the past about his rivals, about the military, that isn't necessarily a surprise to people at this point.
That's right. It's a commander-in-chief saying anything disparaging about people who gave their lives in their country's service is obviously a flashpoint. It also seems, Ed, that it is, if the end of this race, or do you see it this way, that it's about turf? What's the debate about? Is it on Joe Biden's turf that the debate is taking place, or is it on turf that President Trump would like? It seems at the very least this is not turf that President Trump wants to be talking about.
Not at all. And that was part of why I think we saw the Biden campaign seize on this report so quickly, is that it allowed them to try to steer the conversation away from law and order and away from the economy, where he remains vulnerable when compared to the president, and raise again questions about his judgment and his character as they try to keep this focused on a referendum on the incumbent, which, as you said, would benefit him for sure.
Ed, as you mentioned, law and order, the president went to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where there have been protests and violence. Joe Biden responded with a speech this week seeming to buy into the idea that he might have some vulnerability or exposure on this question of violence and law and order. Is that right? Does the Biden campaign see a vulnerability on that issue?
If they didn't, then why was he spending so much time this week making clear that he believes that looters and violent protesters are people who should be held accountable for their actions? I think they saw that last weekend, especially when the president was really hammering them on that as a potential weak spot, but they addressed it quickly, and they also pivoted it, again, in that sense of referendum. The violence is happening now. How is it that the president can manage it if it's happening now? Don't talk about how it might be handled in the future. And look, Biden went to Wisconsin, held a listening session, actually got to meet with the Blake family when the Trump campaign and the White House apparently struggled to make contact with them.
Ed, you've reported that the Biden campaign feels some pressure to get the vice president out there. What is that? Why do they feel that pressure? And what does it look like to campaign in this age of social distancing and mask wearing and all the rest of it?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because at the beginning of this pandemic, Americans widely told us they didn't care if they didn't see these guys campaigning in person. In essence, they understood that it wasn't possible. That's shifted. About 4 in 10 Democrats in our poll say they've got concerns about Biden not being out there, and about half of independents also say they'd like to see him out more. So in the coming days, you'll see Biden go to Pennsylvania twice and to Michigan. He's talked about going to North Carolina. We'll probably see them at some point go to Arizona, which is a state they're obsessed about somehow trying to win. And again, it's quick day trips, much like the president. Biden admitted this week he has been tested for COVID. He will be on a regular basis. And his campaign has vowed to let us know if for some reason at some point something shows up in those tests that would cause concern. So, you know, they're taking precautions, but they now do suddenly feel much more willing and able to get out there, and we expect them to make trips, maybe 2 or 3 a week, for the duration of the campaign.
And he'll be carrying those briefing books with him for his debate as well, the next other big stage at the end of this month. Ed, thanks so much. For more on our CBS News Battleground Tracker, log on to cbsnews.com/polls.